Hey guys, and today I want to talk to you about a word that comes up a lot when people describe themselves. The word is weakness, and it's an interesting one because depending on your interpretation, depends on how you see yourself as weak. And the first thing that I want to really put out there is weakness is something that you feel, not that you are, because weakness is subjective. And I'm going to go through some examples in a minute. So you can feel weak in a certain area. That doesn't necessarily mean you are weak as a whole. So that's a key thing that I really want you to kind of take on board. Okay, so it's not a case of just because you can't do one thing that you're maybe weak at one thing that you're weak as a whole. It's something that you feel that needs improving, and weakness can always be built on. So if there's nothing else you take away from today's video, is that you can always improve a weakness. And I'm going to go through the ways I've found that I've helped my clients do that. So first of all, I break weakness down into three areas. We've got physically weak, we've got mentally weak, and we have socially weak. Okay, so these are different things. So let's look at physically weak. So the first thing people think of when they feel they're physically weak is that they can't pick up a heavy object off the ground. That is obviously a very measurable medium we can use. Is also incredibly subjective because down to power, rate, preference, sport, genetics, there's a lot of things that will kind of put out how strong you can be at a certain starting point. Then we've got things like maybe not being able to run very far. That you can be strong at a certain activity. Okay, I am very weak at running, but I'm very strong at swimming. I'm quite strong at cycling. And things like that. So I have a weakness when it comes to running. That is partly because I'm not built for it, and I don't run very well. My gait is very off. I look a bit like a giraffe trying to run across the savannah. It's not a pretty sight. Then we have things where we feel weak doing tasks. So not necessarily a specific object that we have to pick up off the floor or a chosen sport, but something as simple as carrying your kids around. You can feel weak because you can't do it for very long. Okay, you may be weak in a muscular endurance sense, doing day-to-day tasks, carrying things from one side to the other, may be an area that you're weak at. And finally, unable to perform tasks. Now, this comes more into what I do with my clients that are doing rehab. So I have some elderly clients, I have clients that have been ill, and I have clients that have long-term medical conditions, and it does make them weak. Fatigue kicks in. They aren't strong enough to do things like get out of a chair sometimes. So those are the physical elements of weakness that people will more likely associate with when they think of the term weak. Now, when it comes to the mental side of things, people may have a weakness in managing their stress. You can get very angst up very quickly, and you see it as a mental weakness because you're constantly getting wound up about things, which then causes you more stress, etc. There could be you're weak at managing and coping with certain situations. You're strong across the board, but then there's always one thing that instantly triggers you off, causes a meltdown, whatever, and you can see that as weakness. And mental weakness is kind of a funny one because it's very hard to measure tangibly. You can't measure how much you can pick up and put down over a week. Sometimes you'll deal with something better, and then sometimes you'll go back to square one, and that's kind of difficult to measure, which is why it's harder to kind of break through on a mental weakness alone rather than incorporate it as a whole, which I'll explain in a minute. Then there's being easily overwhelmed, taking on too many tasks, or having too many tasks loaded on you and not being strong enough mentally to say, I can't do that. And that's a big thing. Saying that you can't do something isn't an admission of weakness, it's saying that you need help. So the other thing that I want you to think about right now is weakness isn't the word. If we flip it, it's something you're not strong at, and you can get strong at things. So if your weakness mentally is trying to please too many people or trying to take on too many tasks because you don't want to let people down, that's something you can gain strength in, and it's not a weakness being overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed on a weekly basis on everything that I'm doing, taking on everything that I take on, and sometimes you do have to reach out for help. And finally, not being a rock. People aspire to be the rock that people lean on. People admire those that take on other people's problems. This is a big one with dads, and I can personally relate to that dads sometimes take on the role of the rock because that's what their dad did, that's what their granddad did, and that's still how society really pushes things onto that. I was having this conversation with a client the other day, and we take it on ourselves to be the rock. And if you can't do that 100% of the time, it does really mess with your mental state and how strong you feel, because you feel you should be able to deal with every single thing that comes at you. On the other side of that, if you feel that you're not strong enough to do that, you can punish yourself harder because you feel like you should be a rock. And for that, a rock, somebody chooses to be the rock. Someone chooses to be that person that will take on other people's problems, and some people are the person that needs a rock to unload on. So you don't make someone the rock in a situation. That person has already nominated themselves to be that. So don't feel at any point because you're not good at taking on the world's problems, your family's problems, your friends' problems. That just may not be who you are, and there is somebody that will take on that job because they've chosen to do that. Okay, nobody would purposely put their problems onto somebody else. We don't do that naturally. What we know is there are people that we can unload onto because they have taken on that role. And finally, socially. Now, socially kind of bleeds in with the mental one, but I find it comes very specific to social situations, which is why I put it in this category. Not being strong in group situations. People can feel a weakness when being in a group, being able to talk in front of new people, and they don't necessarily associate it with being mentally weak because they might be really good at taking on tasks. And being able to put themselves in, with 7 different tasks in front of them, they'll get them all done. Yet you put them in a group of more than 4 people and they shut down because they don't really know what they need to say or something like that. Not being able to stand up to bullies is a social thing. It's a huge problem. Having been personally bullied myself, I know what it's like. And the trouble is, everyone has their own version of how to stand up to a bully, and it has to work for you. It has to be your own coping mechanism. And the trouble is, if you don't know how to do that, you feel like you're constantly you're weak because you're being bullied. You're not being bullied because you're weak. You're being bullied because somebody's trying to assert their dominance on top of you. In childhood, it's because a natural evolutionary trait is to be top of the pecking order, so you get the most resources because you're not strong enough to fight for them yourself. What you can do is push people underneath you away to get what you need to do. And you're also trying to find a leader. As kids, we're trying to find leaders to move forward, and decide who's going to lead and where we play in roles. Not being a presence in a room is a huge one for people. They feel really weak when they walk into a room because that people don't stop and stare. I mean, this could be a physical thing. It could be a commanding presence, which follows into not being a leader. When people don't follow them, they have to follow somebody else, and they feel it's because they're weak. And it might just be that you haven't found something that you can lead in yet. Mastery in anything comes from passion, and there are going to be things that you are really passionate about that you can lead people in, but you're not in an environment to do that. So don't necessarily think that any of these points are a permanent thing. They can all be dealt with in certain ways. And the way I've been training people to deal with this is the way you deal with weakness is you have to find something that you can scale and something that you can measure, because then it gives you feedback all the time. Now, working on things mentally from a behavioral therapy approach is to submerge yourself in these situations. You have to, like exposure therapy, if you're scared of being in open places, you have to go to an open place. Now, depending on how strong you're feeling at the time, and this is the hard part about it, is like you might have a really great time and then something can set you back and you're back to square one, which then puts you on a downward spiral. To do I find the best way to work with it is to do it with physical acts, because it's very hard, if you're consistent, to drop physical strength. So if you're picking up the same object time in and time out, your body will naturally adapt to that. And I can guarantee you right now, with my hand on my heart, because I've done this with so many people, if I asked you how much you thought you could lift right now, it would probably be lower, unless you're a complete narcissist in the nicest possible way, be lower than what you actually can. Because we lowball ourselves. We don't think we can lift what we can lift, and when push comes to shove, it actually happens. So with physical training, and specifically strength training, we can measure and prove to ourselves that we're stronger than we thought we were, because we always downplay how strong we are. And I've done this with clients as a simple test. How much do you think you can pick up? They'll throw out some arbitrary number because that's what they've heard, and they don't understand how much things weigh, and I'll get them to add 20 to 30 kilos on top of that. And the cool part with that is what that does then is it tests your rationality of how strong you are, because you came in thinking you could only lift so much. and it's been proven that you can lift more. So now if you are stronger than you think physically, maybe you're stronger than you are mentally. Maybe you're stronger than you are socially. You just haven't had that measurable tool yet to get in there. And the thing is, when you're doing it as a strength exercise, it's just you and that object. You don't have to rely on interactions from other people. So for instance, if we were going to go for things socially and I said to get you stronger at being a presence in a room, I want you to walk in and say hello in a commanding tone. Well, all of a sudden there are other elements in the room. There are other people. Are they distracted? Do they know you? Are they going to respond nicely to you? The iron is mute and dumb. It doesn't speak, and it doesn't, have anything judgmental to say to you. What it actually does is just move when you move it. And what that can then do is allow you to open up other windows. That's what I do as a trainer. And if any of this is striking a chord with you, which every single person will have something they feel they're weak with. And as using fitness as a ladder towards improving mental strength and social strength, I would love to help you if that's the case. So if you do have any questions, or if you simply just want to come in and try and see what you can actually pick up and then give yourself a bit of a mental boost, feel free and come and see me and we'll see what we can do. Have a wonderful day, guys. If there's any other subjects you'd like me to break down, please let me know and I will do my best to do so. Bye-bye.